It's already been said before that it's been found that it's in the Sufi stories that we find very clearly discernible the dimensions of stories. That level where we understand its moral or its teaching. That level where numerology and sacred symbols and archetypes are present. And a unifying thread indicating that interrelatedness. And like all stories, having a secret. As a story that will challenge us to find where it is that these dimensions and the dimensions of existence and the aspects of our own psyche, because all elements of all stories represent part of ourselves. Where do they meet? But there's also a challenge in the telling of this story. In a time long ago, in the ancient city of Samarkand, there ruled a Khan. And this Khan had 3 daughters. One was called Silk. One was called Pearl. And the third was called Zephyr. Now the Khan called his 3 daughters to him and said, "It's time for you to be wed." And to the first one, Silk, he said, "You will marry my court poet, who is also a great swordsman." And to the second, Pearl, he said, "And you will marry my standard bearer, who is also a great warrior." And then he turned to Zephyr and he said, "And you must wait." So there were great celebrations that took place. For 40 days and 40 nights and 40 days and 40 nights, there were great marriage celebrations of the 2 princesses. But after the end of these 2 long periods of festivities, the Khan said, "I'm tired of all of this. I'm going to go hunting." So he took an entourage out into the forest. And after a day of hunting, the Khan laid down to rest. But just as he was going off into sleep, there was a great rumble underneath him, and out of the ground rose an apparition, something that we would call a demon or a dev. And the Khan said to this dev, "Oh, greetings, great dev, and salutations." "Well," said this great apparition, "just as well you greeted me in this way, otherwise I would eaten you immediately." The Khan said, "Well, what do you want?" And the dev rather disconsolately said, "You can't do anything for me. I've been relegated here because twice I was given the chance to change my ways and I refused. So here I am, only allowed to come out at night when I cannot do harm to people." So the Khan said, "Well, since there is no King Sulaiman, blessed be his name, who is present on the earth at this time, who is it that could relegate you?" And the Dev said, "Why, don't you know that meek and humble dervish who has been a member of your court for so long?" "Oh," said the Khan, "I haven't had the opportunity to be instructed by him." And the Dev said, "Well, your time will no doubt come." And he said, "I have to go now." And so he resumed his place underground. So when the Khan, after his time of hunting, went back to his palace, it so happened that one day when he was sitting in his court, awaiting the day's activities and those who came, the dervish presented himself, and giving the normal obeisances to the Khan, he said, "You know, you married your daughters off rather hastily without consulting a dervish. Not that you didn't marry them off properly." The Khan said, "Yes, I realize that this was not appropriate." But the dervish said, "There is a chance for you." And he said, "But this will be a great test." He said, and with that, the dervish brought in a horse. And he said to the Khan, "You will marry your daughter to this horse." Now the Khan was, of course, very taken aback by this, but already having had experience of the power of this dervish, he did not dare go against this instruction. So his third daughter, Zephyr, was duly relegated to the barn where the horses were kept. But, as is the way with these things, when the third daughter, Zephyr, went to take up her residence, consummate her marriage, so to speak, when she went to the barn, not only was it transformed into a wonderful, well-adorned abode, but the horse himself changed into a handsome male being. Her husband said to her, "It is my task to bring trustworthiness, and this is a test for you. You must never tell anyone of what has transpired here. You are to tell no one that your horse husband is really a man." And this his wife Zephyr promised to do. Now, of course, she spent much time in her father's palace, and many times when she saw her sisters with their handsome husbands, when she was tempted to tell that her husband was really a man. But she kept her peace. But then, one day, the Khan called a great horde of people together to also test those who were around him on the field of valor. Now at this time Zephyr longed to tell her sisters when she saw their husbands adorned in their great regalia of her own husband. And then when it came to the arena, when both the sisters' husband comported themselves so well by besting all who were brought into that testing ground. But on the third day of the contests, the evening before, when Zephyr was with her husband, he said to her, "I know that you have longed to see me, and tomorrow I will show you. But remember, you must tell no one." The next day, the field of people were down to the two husbands of her sisters, having proven themselves. And then out into the arena rode a magnificent being with a standard on which there was only a horseshoe. Zephyr knew that this was her husband, and to the great surprise of everyone, he was able to best all who were present, and the valorous husbands of her sisters. Zephyr could not resist. She turned to her father, the Khan, and said, "This is my husband. This is who he really is." Ah, the Khan, with some awareness, said, "My daughter, you have not passed the test. And because you have not passed the test, it has reflected on all of us, because it means that we have not taught you well enough." When Zephyr went back to the barn, there was a note from her husband, and it said, "When I was in the arena and weakness came over me, I knew that you had broken your word, and I have left. You may not ever see me again. But here are 3 hairs from my mane. If you need help, burn one of these hairs." Now, of course, Zephyr was beside herself with grief and sadness and remorse. So in desperation, she burned one of the hairs. And who should appear but the Dev, the demon. And she said, "What are you doing here? I didn't call you." And the Dev said, "You must have had an evil thought when you burned the hair." "What must I do?" said Zephyr. And the Dev said, "Call the dervish." So Zephyr burned the second hair, invoking the dervish, and the dervish appeared. The dervish wordlessly sent the Dev back to where he came from, and then himself disappeared. Still remorseful and in grief, Zephyr burned the last hair with all her being, calling for her husband. And he returned. And he said, "It has been done. But would that we had kept the 3 hairs to put to better use than to use for our own ends. But now I can remain a man, and we can live happily together for the remainder of our lives." If we were to discuss, we could very clearly bring to light the levels discernible in this story. But what we seek is the secret of all stories. When we recognize the secret in all the stories, discernible in every experience of our life, we can discern the secret within ourselves. So the question is asked, where do the elements of all stories, this story, arise from? When we can recognize this place, state, we can know that every word that emanates from our lips, every action that we undertake, is truth. What is the secret contained in this story, all stories, our story? Where is the meeting place of all the elements of our psyche, all the dimensions of this story and all other stories? Not our mind, surely. It's bound by our sensory perceptions. Place of an awareness is not our mind. What is the secret that we seek? Look to this story. And all stories, your story. Bring it down to a level of mind that can stimulate a little the ability to express. What would you perceive as the unifying thread of this story? And that which represents what it is that's spoken of. What's the thread that binds this story together?
I think it's following what you know is the right thing to do. You know, your own truth. And if you allow your ego to get in the way, you can get in trouble. So I see it like, so the princess, her ego got in the way. And she wasn't listening to her. How that the king did listen to his.
Absolutely. So we can say really the king was the unifying thread in this story. Wouldn't you agree? He had a certain knowingness. He was the initiator. He understood what the Dev was talking about. He understood that the test had not been fulfilled and his place in it. So you could say that the king, like in many stories, there's the king who's the thread of the story. But then if we look at the king and the places of the other elements, what would be the dervish's place in this story?
Well, I felt that when somebody is trying to achieve who they truly are and trying to achieve their purpose, whatever that is, they're trying to discover it, they're going to be tested.
Yes.
And they're going to be given tests beyond what they think they're capable of.
Uh-huh.
Because you have to go towards what you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
because you're becoming someone different. And so she was given that test.
Mm-hmm.
And she did very well, except for the last tiny, minute second where she didn't pass it. However, she was given a second opportunity to show her character and to show the virtues that she had by giving those 3 hairs. And that was the second test that was given to her to see how she would respond.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer, when her husband came back and said, I can be with you now, the hairs could have been used for a higher purpose or a better purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So she kind of passed that, but kind of not.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're actually being pulled towards being the person you need to be, then the question is, do you have the ability to pass the test? And the answer is yes, but do you have the gumption to go through it and actually do it without being without being motivated by the wrong thing? That's the question.
Yes, but the question that's been asked is what does the dervish represent in this story? Since it's the king who's the unifying thread.
Well, he went across all three, the dervish.
So what would he represent to us in this story? And looking at these stories, recognizing that everything is an aspect of ourselves. The divine.
He's the one that really guides us along, so to speak.
All right. So we call it the divine. He represents.
Trying to guide you through the tests.
All right. Thank you.